Hey everyone, I'm Andy Petranek, and this is the Whole Life Challenge podcast. It's the place we connect with extraordinary people, ones who think differently, who have risen to the top of their field, who have vast knowledge, experience, and insights to share, as well as incredible stories to tell. They are also the ones who have figured out a way to take their life's experience and turn it into something that truly makes a difference in the world for others. These are their stories. And here we are. Hey gang, it's Andy Petranek. Welcome back. This is episode number 121 of the Whole Life Challenge podcast. I'm really super stoked today. My conversation finally gets to go up with Chris Keyes of Outside Magazine. He's the editor-in-chief of Outside Magazine, guys. He's a really cool person. He does a lot of really cool stuff, and he knows a lot of really cool people. I learned so much from Chris about the publishing business, the magazine publishing business, the process of writing stories, how they go from beginning to middle to end in terms of getting into a publication like Outside. Chris, just a little bit more about Chris. He's been the editor of Outside since 2006. He became only the fourth editor in Outside's 40-year history. First of all, I didn't know Outside Magazine had been around for 40 years. I started reading it back in the early 90s. And to know that it's been around 40 years, it's a long time. Chris oversees all the content for Outside, which includes the monthly print publication, 2 annual editions of the Outside Buyer's Guide, and the magazine's website, outsideonline.com. During his tenure, Outside has remained dedicated to long-form literary journalism. It's earned 8 National Magazine Award nominations and won an Ellie for General Excellence in 2013. Chris has a background actually in outdoor sports. He mountain bikes, he runs, he ski mountaineers, which we talk about in the podcast. And he's just an all-around great guy. He's got a family, kids. I mean, he's the epitome of a person who thrives living in a small town like Santa Fe, New Mexico. And like I said before, learned so many really cool things about Chris, Outside Magazine, and the online publishing world, things that I never even thought to ask before, and definitely didn't know who to ask if I had a question. So you're gonna love it. You're going to love it, guys. Should I tell you more about the episode? How about I tell you a little bit more about the episode? Because I really didn't go in any bullets. We talk a lot about some crazy things came up in the podcast. We talk about the marathon monks of Mount Hiei. We talk about the North Face Endurance Challenge. We talk about dark retreats and Aaron Ralston and Lance Armstrong. And we talk about Chris's entry point into Outside Magazine as an intern. We talk about his very meandering path toward being a professional writer or a professional editor. It included fly fishing and working at a cattle ranch. We talk about Kindle or books, writing versus hand or versus the computer or on your iPhone. Or how to journal and the best ways to journal, and how he assigns writers for stories and photographers for stories. We talk about the article that he's most proud of or thinks of. It's the article that comes to mind when he thinks of some of the most quality work that he's done and worked on in the magazine. Trust me, this is an episode not to miss. You're going to love it. Yeah. So I'm not going to talk any more about that, but I'm going to tell you a couple other things. Number one, my fan of the week. So I select someone from the podcast ratings and reviews in iTunes to be the fan of the week. Guys, it helps me so much, helps the podcast so much. Get out there in the world, get all these guests out in the world. I want to bring you better and better quality guests. Not that the people that I have had have not been quality, but I want access to more people. And the more people I have noticing the show and listening to the show, the better that gets. And the way we do that is by ratings and reviews. So if you can go to iTunes and leave a review, here's the best way to do it. bit.ly/WLC-podcast. That will, if you use that link, it will open up iTunes on your computer and you can go to ratings and reviews and write a review. And I would very, very, very much appreciate it. But the fan of the week this week is, well, gosh, they wrote a review yesterday, which is really cool. Waxalart Chicago. Waxalart says, warning, listening to this podcast will change your life for the better. I can't say enough about how this podcast has opened my eyes to be a better person, both physically and mentally. I share all the life lessons with my friends and family. My family and I are looking forward to doing our first Whole Life Challenge this January. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you, Waxalart. Waxalart Chicago. I really appreciate you listening, and I really appreciate you taking the time to write about it and tell other people. So, guys, please go out there and do that. I'd really, really appreciate it. And that's enough about that. This is the last episode of 2017. So it would not be complete if I didn't plug the Whole Life Challenge. We're starting on January 20th. So if you've thought about registering, now's a great time to do it. www.wholelifechallenge.com. They are the title sponsor of the podcast, and they're my only sponsor of the podcast right now. So there you go. That's how we keep this podcast going, is via the Whole Life Challenge. So join us for the January challenge. It's the first one that's 6 weeks, and it's a whole new. It's going to be a whole new experience. So I'm really excited to the start of that. Don't forget that if you want the complete list of my notes from the podcast, along with the links from the podcast, go to the show notes. The show notes can be found at wholelifechallenge.com/podcast. Do that. So I'm not going to belabor this anymore. I'm going to tell you, let's get on with the episode, huh? So get ready for the one and the only Chris Keyes, the editor-in-chief of Outside Magazine. We're at the headquarters of Outside Magazine in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and welcome. It's good. It's good to have met you. It's very surreal for me to be here, and I was telling you this before, but I'll just share it with the audience. I've been in the adventure world for, I don't know, not so much in the last 10, 12 years, because I started CrossFit and doing other stuff, but in the adventure racing world and mountaineering world and backpacking and orienteering, and Outside Magazine was like my Bible. I mean, it was a thing me and my friends would bond over. We'd read the articles, we'd get the gear, then we'd use Outside Magazine to figure out the sponsors we were going to go after for our team. We'd go to Outdoor Retailer every year, and we'd be, the Outside Magazine was literally the Bible. And so it was the reason we're here, is when you guys reached out to us about the Whole Life Challenge, it was just very surreal to me. Like,
why are they
this is backwards. This is totally backwards. So it's really, really cool to be here. And I was telling you also the other day that this is pretty much what I expect. It looks like what I would expect in Outside Magazine, the offices for Outside Magazine, the location, there's skis and outdoor gear in everybody's office. Yeah. Everybody's doing the stuff that you guys write about.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that our location really is what allows us to remain that sort of authenticity of what we're writing about.
You mean there are not a lot of big magazine publishers in Santa Fe?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a media backwater if you hadn't gotten that sense yet. And there's advantages and disadvantages to that. Like, there's a lot of advantages to be in New York. It's
especially if you're like the New Yorker.
Yeah, exactly. If your name is in the title, yes.
By the way, that voice was not mine, and I didn't introduce Michael. Michael Stanwyck is on the podcast with us today, and Michael's not usually on the podcast, so welcome, Michael.
Hello.
Sorry I didn't introduce you.
Yeah,
Michael and I are here in Santa Fe together.
Stuck here in Santa Fe with Andy, and so
stuck here.
Yeah.
Jesus, really?
Yeah, rather than...
Come on, we're having fun, aren't we?
Yeah, we're having a great time. We're actually having a really good time. And Andy and I don't spend a lot of time hanging out. We spent the whole weekend together, and strangely, like, have had a really good time.
Yeah, it's very
most of our waking hours
really?
have been together, and we've like talked and
the whole
laughed.
challenge will go on.
Right? Yeah.
Right.
Like went to art together.
It's not
went
necessarily
to spa
supposed
together.
to work that way,
No.
right? The people you work with are not necessarily supposed to be your friends.
No,
That's right.
So
Brilliant. I was like, wow. I was like, Andy's a good guy. I was like, maybe I'll invite him to my next party.
that is hilarious. So anyway, sorry, get back to
No, not at all. So yeah, I mean, I think there's disadvantages in that it's harder to find a lot of journalists in Santa Fe. So we recruit from outside and are always bringing people in. But once they get here, and if you're passionate about the magazine itself, this is a great place to live because we have everything right out the back door.
How was your route to getting here to be the editor of Outside Magazine? I mean, it's like to me, it's a really big deal.
Yeah.
You're like, this is a thing. It was funny because I think yesterday or 2 days ago in a conversation, you're like, I didn't know what I wanted to do after I left college. So like, how was the route getting here?
It was pretty circuitous. I mean, I went to college. I was pre-med.
Wow.
And kind of around my junior year or so, I decided I had no idea why I was pre-med. I think I was just following a track. Like, I guess I should be a lawyer or a doctor.
This was at Duke.
This was at Duke University. And
did you grow up on the East Coast?
And I'd grown up in Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
And so one of the things, I was super homesick for the West when I got out there. And my parents actually gave me a subscription to Outside my sophomore year in college, and the very first issue I got was Into the Wild was the cover story.
Wow.
John Krakauer's piece. And that just like, I remember pulling that issue out of my mailbox and starting reading that article, walking all the way back to my dorm, finishing it, reading it again. I don't think email it was just being adopted around that time. So
What year was that?
This was like 94, 95.
Yeah, right. That was the issue. Was it a bus that was on the front cover?
The bus was on the inside. On the outside cover was just like a landscape shot in Alaska, and I think the cover line was something like "Death of an Innocent" or "Death in the Wild" or something like that.
Huh.
And yeah, anyway, that piece I didn't decide then and there, but it definitely planted a seed of like what great long form journalism and the kind of impact it could have. So after I graduated, I had switched majors, but I got a biology degree, had no interest in going into biology, but I was just so far down the track.
Right.
And yeah, my mom was a career advisor at a college in Portland called Reed College. And I had gone and taught English in Asia and worked on a cattle ranch, worked as a fly fishing guide, still just had no idea.
So you were kind of like the guy in Into the Wild.
Yeah, yes, I was trying. Yeah, exactly. I was tapping into the Christopher McCandless route.
Were you into writing? I mean, was writing a thing for you?
Well, when I went and taught English in Taipei, Taiwan, made some money there, and it was right when the late 90s Asian economic crisis happened. So I went to Indonesia right after that, planned on spending a couple months traveling there. The currency there had crashed, so I could literally live on 25 cents to 50 cents a day.
Wow.
With a hotel and
the richest man in Indonesia.
I was the richest man in Indonesia, and I think I ended up traveling there about 9 months. And
cost you $45.
Cost me $45. So
God, that's amazing.
So anyway, I was keeping a journal that whole time and started to kind of, and just, it wasn't journalism per se, but I was just recording my experiences. And
was it like the beginnings of a blog kind of thing, or were you typing it, or were you writing it by hand?
It was just for myself at that time, but I was enjoying that process, and I was reading a lot of nonfiction and travel kind of writing at that time. And so it was something I was interested in. I wasn't necessarily directly pursuing it at that point, but it wasn't until I got back to the States and my mom literally sent me a flyer about an internship at Outside, and I was like, okay, that's something I could see doing.
Let me ask you a mechanical question about when you were traveling and keeping a journal. Did you have any sort of a daily routine that you follow? Would you do an adventure or do something in your day and then every night come home and journal about it for an hour or 2 hours? Did you create some sort of ritual around it?
Yeah, I actually was traveling. I met a guy from England who was much more rigorous about keeping his journal, to the point where I almost felt guilty about the fact that I wasn't writing as much as him. So it became almost tapped into this competitive streak in me.
And you were writing by hand?
Yes.
Not typing?
Yep. And this was like late 90s. There were internet cafes and that sort of thing, but blogging hadn't really started at that point.
You didn't have your MacBook Pro with you, or your iPhone,
or anything like that. Yeah,
right.
Yeah. I remember my parents just being so excited that there was something called a Hotmail account and that I was going to be able to correspond with them.
Right.
But yeah, so there wasn't a real ritual, but it was a daily thing that it would be you experience the day, and then after we'd had dinner or something, you just sitting down for about an hour and writing about it.
Would you, when you keep your journals like that, and I don't know if, well, whatever. I was about to judge my own question, so screw it. Was it more reciting of what you did, like describing the events, or was it more like how you felt about things, or did it vary? Like, how did you?
It would never be the same thing. It would start with the recording of events, and then I would find myself like kind of realizing like something that I'd seen that day that had more impact than I'd kind of realized, and would go into the details of that. Yeah, not even inside, but just that I had recorded the details in ways that I could write about and. With much more fervor than I would something else, and then I would realize, well, maybe that had affected me some way internally, but it was what I loved about the process is that I never knew what I was going to really write about.
There were really no rules about
There's
it.
never any rules, and I think that's with any journal. Like you start writing, and that's always the exercise that every writing class will tell you is that if you're facing that blank piece of paper, you could stare at it forever, thinking, how am I going to start this? It's just fucking start,
Yeah, right.
I've actually started a journaling practice as a part of a program that I'm in, and they encourage several different kinds of journaling, and I've found that it results in me having to keep like 4 or 5 different journals. And one of the things I'm considering, and like the way you're talking about it, is like, okay, I understand what these different kinds of prompts they have for me are. Mm-hmm. Now can I just start writing? And if something about one of those things comes up, incorporate it, but not make it a rule about saying, first I have to do this journal. Because I do find it very mechanical.
Yes.
And very much like I have to get this one done so I can start the next one and then start the next one. And it hasn't really touched into anything yet. And I think the way that you're talking about it sounds much more organic and allowing the rules to just be ideas in your mind about what you could write about.
Yeah, and I think, I use that to this day. I write an editor's letter every month, and it's kind of the worst kind of slot for a writer because it's the exact same length every month, within, it's 300 to 375 words. And I've written, it's been 10 years I've been the editor now, so what is that? It's over 120 of them. And there's some months where I'm just like, I just don't have anything to say.
When do you decide what to write? Like how much in advance?
When those times,
you work with deadlines? Like,
I have to have a deadline. You can ask our managing editor.
Well, you do have a deadline.
I do have a deadline,
literally,
but I guess I get to push it to the extreme limits. Not as extreme as some editors, because this is like notorious throughout the industry, as nobody likes to write these. I like to write them once I've figured out the way in, but it's always that blank sheet of paper, and I have to go through the contents of the magazine and look, okay, what is it I want to write about, and I'll see 2 or 3 subjects, and I'll just start on one of them, and invariably, once I write that first sentence, it's my way in. But
so it's something that's tied in topically to what's in the magazine that month.
Almost every time. Sometimes I'll be riffing off something in the news, but we're a monthly, so it's just really hard to say. Like I could be writing about something that happens today, and it's way old by the time.
Right, by the time it comes out, it's not even relevant. Or the wind has changed.
Especially the news cycle nowadays.
Yeah, right.
So,
yeah.
What's the latest you've ever waited to write that? And or do you have someone that? Do you have 2 questions? Do you have someone that edits you? And then secondly, what's the latest you've ever waited to get that done?
I have. I don't necessarily have the editor's letter has become. It's so much in my voice, and I can write it really quickly now once I get that start. I don't really have an editor on that, but if I'm ever writing like a feature story or anything like that, I always have an editor here.
Yep.
editors are invaluable and always will see something that you didn't see. And then my once anything is ever written for the magazine, whether it's myself or anyone else, you have an editor, and then you go into page proofs, and multiple people on staff are reading it and critiquing it. And
Not for your letter, but for a regular
and my letter.
Oh,
yeah.
really?
Yep. A lot of people will read that as well, and give me notes, and I can decide whether to take them or not. Yeah.
Do you use Do you use Word? Do you use Google Documents?
I use Google Docs.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
There's we also have a publishing platform that I won't name because I'll get in trouble, but I dislike very much.
Huh.
But,
Got it.
I've tried so many different platforms for journaling. I'll either do it by hand or I use Evernote for a lot of things, so I'll try and keep a daily journal in there. I've found online software that allows you to sort of like block out everything else on your computer and then journal in there. But ultimately, I find that all this it requires some other step then to integrate it into something else, and so I always end up falling back to some of the basics like Microsoft Word or Google Docs, somewhere where it can just be stored sequentially and
Well, Google Docs is great because we'll have I have editors all over the country or writers all over the country, and we can both be in the same document at the same time, and writing notes to each other, etc. So it's just very seamless. Whereas Microsoft Word is just very back and forth.
I agree. Word drives me crazy. I love Google Docs. It's funny. I'm going to make sure Becca listens to this because if Outside can use Google Docs, maybe we should use Google Docs, Becca.
Yeah, Becca will. She
likes Microsoft Word.
Even if I write something in Google Docs, she'll download it in Microsoft Word. Then she likes to track the changes and that kind of stuff, and then she'll do things, and then she'll send you the Word document. Yeah. So at that point, you're in the flow of using Word to edit with her.
There's definitely like a passive aggressive method of using those two things because there's a lot of writers that prefer that, and you'll send it to them in a Google Doc, and you'll get it back in Word.
Yeah. Oh God, I hate that.
Well, but when it comes to like journaling, part of the reason I don't like using things like Google Docs is it feels so not romantic.
Yeah.
It feels like it's like I like this idea of like having a journal and having it be a part of you, and like logging into Google to do that, it kind of cuts that thread.
Yeah, I don't know if I could do journal writing. I like to have paper. I'm pretty obsessive about notebooks too.
Oh, really?
I love
Recently,
notebooks.
I got there was this new tablet coming out. It was called the Remarkable tablet, and it was writing on the screen, but the feel of the pen and the screen, it's very much like paper.
Is it because I have this notebook obsession?
Yeah.
Everything that I look at online is they track me. So these people have found me.
I get
ad for
me
it
too.
everywhere.
In Instagram, all over.
It's
Facebook,
the most like paper.
Yeah.
Because I used to do it in Evernote with a Bluetooth pen. Writing on glass just wasn't the same experience. It's not exactly like paper, and I suspect that someday someone will do a much better job. I've seen something else for artists that allows you to write on paper and it transfers or draw on paper and it transfers the picture. I don't know if it works the same for journaling. But I've used it now. It's brand new, and I wouldn't get it now. It's full of glitches. I've looked at what they've experienced online with customer service. It's going to take some time, like anything else. It was one of the very few things I early adopted.
Yeah.
Like I bought it before it was out because it was half price to buy it early. And I haven't really been thrilled with it, and I've actually gone back to like using Evernote, and I'll probably go back to a paper notebook. So I wouldn't say invest in it. It's going to take some time. Their nibs for the pen, they wear out. You have to keep replacing them, but they actually wear out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
They send you about a dozen, and I'm like, what do I do when I run out of this?
Sharpen your pencil. Come on.
That's not a pencil, but
sharpen the nib.
It's cool, but it's clunky. The file system is clunky. It's got that kind. It kind of loads like a Kindle did 5 years ago. So it's like slow and weird and ghosts and.
Okay, I'm definitely not getting one.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't recommend it yet. But
Gosh, they make it look so remarkable.
They do.
Why?
They
I
do.
wonder why.
Well, people are like, it's remarkable how bad their customer service is. But I think it's a cool device. Everyone's trying to do something like that. I've been so into finding an on-screen tablet for like 10 or 15 years. I've wanted that to be the thing.
Yeah.
I've wanted to have a computer, but also be able to write by hand.
Yeah, me too, actually.
And it's not happened quite yet.
I tried it a lot when iPads came out and tried to find the right pen and the right tablet, and it just I remember I went to a barefoot running seminar, actually, a 5-day seminar, and I tried taking all my notes on my iPad with this thing on the glass, and I really made full effort to, this is going to work, and I'm going to make this happen, and God, it was hard.
Yeah.
God, it was hard, and I just
the thing they can't replicate is flipping pages.
Yeah.
And for some reason, like if I want to go back to my notes, I can quickly flip through pages. But man, this is like load.
Yeah.
So there's always going to be a discontinuity between an actual handwritten thing and anything that they do digitally.
Absolutely, yeah.
So yeah.
And that's the thing that this. Our whole industry is wrestling with, but
yeah, right.
I'm certainly not going to say that magazines are the future, but that's why I say that they'll never go away in the same way that books will never go away. And,
right,
we were just seeing that in books. I mean, books are having this resurgence now at a time when people thought everybody would be converted to a Kindle.
Yeah. We were just talking about there are books that I want to hold, and there are books that I don't care if I hold or not. If it's like just an information book, I'm happy to get it on the Kindle and get the information. But if it's a book that really means something, I want to hold it in my hand.
Yeah, and then I want to see it on my bookshelf.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I miss the ability to thumb and know how far I am based on how thick the book is, and on my left hand versus my right hand.
Yeah.
And I like to be able to flip to the back and not worry that it won't remember where my place was in the book. I'm always paranoid to jump to a later point in the book because I'm thinking, oh my God, it's going to sync. It's going to ask me, do you want to sync to the latest place read? And I'm going to accidentally click yes, and I'm going to completely lose my place in the book. And so there's some challenges.
Yeah, I think we're
online reading.
I don't think anybody would argue that technology has moved so much faster than our brain has. We're still very tactile, visual, tactile. I mean, so much of our experience is through our senses. And having everything be digital, it's like you really rob your brain of something really intrinsic to the experience. And it's not just reading, because even reading has only been around for 500 years, really, for most of us. But just the idea of interacting with a physical object is so different for us than a digital
and there are a lot of
page.
studies are showing that in terms of your learning quality and retention is better on the printed paper than it is digitally.
Well, and the really interesting thing also now is the audio stuff, like audio books, because I've heard a lot about how audio is actually really good for retention. If you consider that storytelling is so much older than the written page, that it completely makes sense. But like I look at your shelf and I see this, the magazines on the shelf. Even that, I tried to collect magazines for a long time. I'm big into food, so food magazines, because it's like you never get to go back to something you saw on the internet. It's like it didn't exist indexed anywhere. It's just kind of floating out there in space versus like having that issue and pulling it off the shelf. It's totally different. And I get it. Like I don't have that much space anymore to save every magazine that I ever got or every book that I ever read.
Yeah, the other place I see it is like ToDo Lists. I've probably tried every single
you and me both
online digital version of it, and I always go back to like I just want my really nice pen and my really nice notebook and my system and that tactile approach to it, and it's so much more effective for me.
I've used there's a new one that I've been using. Well, we're using Trello now in the company, which I've adopted for my own personal stuff simply because I want to be well versed in it for company stuff. Yep. And it's actually great for sharing stuff and projects.
Yeah, we use that as well.
But I found a writing one that's like Evernote, but it has that feel like it's not opening a Google Doc. It's called Bear. And so I've been using that sometimes, like if on a Sunday rolls up, and I don't want to go to Trello because Trello to me associates like getting things done, and I don't really want to feel like I have to get things done, but I want to make a list, and so I'll open up Bear and it'll let me put in checklists and put in things, and I enjoy the experience. The feeling of when it's open, even writing on it, I enjoy. So
I definitely don't manage my life and my work the same because I've tried to use Trello for my life. Yeah, and it just feels like a very regimented, productivity-based way to organize my life. It's like spend time with my girlfriend.
right.
Don't show her that one.
She would be glad to know that I was making an effort, like that it was important enough to me to like reshape my brain around it. But it's not. That's not really one of our problems. But just in general, like the things in your life aren't the same thing as the things in your work necessarily. I mean, they can be, but there's a different quality to them.
Yeah. Chris, when did you decide? So going back to your story, and you became an intern at Outside. when did you realize you actually had a knack for writing?
Wait, I want to ask you something about that really quickly, because it seems like there's this weird synchronicity that Outside Magazine has in your life. You left for college, and to keep you connected to that outside life, your mom sent you Outside Magazine.
Right.
And then you went on your adventures, you finished college, you went to Asia, you did a bunch of traveling around, and the moment you finished and came back, another thing from Outside Magazine appeared on your doorstep from your mom that said, hey, they're doing this, and you took advantage of that. How does that, what does that feel like? Does it feel like a sense of sort of destiny for you?
Yeah, a little bit. I don't believe so much in that, but I think I was definitely tapping into something I appreciated about the magazine, and that it was this combination of this passion I have for adventure and this passion I have for writing. And there's no other, at least in the magazine world, outlet where I could sort of fuse those two. There are a lot of magazines that I would love to work for, and certainly earlier in my career I would have enjoyed, but I always knew that this is the kind of the place that I would want to end up. And so the first time I applied for the internship, I had zero journalism experience, and this was a paid internship, so it was a little more serious, and I didn't hear a word back the first time. And then I volunteered at a couple.
Did you have to submit writing samples and stuff?
Yeah, I think you had to submit like 3 or 4 story ideas, maybe a critique of an issue of the magazine, and like a cover letter and various things. So, and writing clips. So I didn't have any writing clips except for my journals.
What's a writing clip? Like
a writing clip is literally like an example of something you've published.
Got it.
So yeah, I think it was the third time that I applied that I got it, and I was just thrilled, and I literally still had no idea how magazines worked. Or
by the time you applied a third time, had you started thinking, well, maybe I should get something published, or maybe I should? Did you do any prep work for the?
That's why I finally got on the radar, because I was volunteering for, or I should say I was interning, but those were volunteer internships at a couple of local publications in Portland. Okay. So I got some clips, I got some experience, I did some reporting. I had a little bit more to bring to the table at that point. But I still didn't, in terms of a national magazine, I had no idea what I was getting into. I just had this kind of notion. You said that like Outside looked exactly what you thought it would be. I had just no idea. And it's like when you're going to somebody's house or something, you have this vision in your head, and then you see it and you can't remember what it was that you had before. That's what it was like for me. I just remember it being very different. I can't remember what it was that I was picturing. But the work they threw you into in an internship was really great. It was fact-checking. So I would read these long feature stories, and then I would essentially have to re-report them, call all the sources, make sure the quotes were correct, all the details in the stories were correct. So I kind of learned how you put together a story. Did
you have to decide what the relevant facts were? Or
yeah, you kind of go through and say, like, with your highlighter and figure out everything that is of a factual nature. And if it is of a factual nature, then you have to check it with some other source. And so just the rigor of that, and then you would also watch these features go through multiple drafts. And so you kind of, by osmosis, would see, okay, here's how a story came in, here's how an editor reacted to it, and here's how we ended up publishing it. And sometimes there was a vast difference between the first draft and where it came through. And what I didn't realize at the time, but that was... I was learning how to edit by just watching that process. Do
you find that when you read other magazines these days, there's a level of fact-checking that's not as important, either in certain arms of the publishing industry or less important than it used to be? Because I feels to me like a lot of people sort of play fast and loose now, from magazines up to the president. It's like facts aren't as important as a feeling.
Well, there's a couple things happening there. Okay, so first off... There's a difference between what newspapers do and what magazines do historically. So a newspaper, your reporters are essentially your fact checkers. They're incredibly rigorous if they're following all the protocols of good reporting. Multiple sources on facts. They generally, and because they're producing so much content on a daily, hourly basis, that can't all be fact-checked if you want to be timely with that stuff. Right. But if they're following rigorously, they shouldn't get much wrong. In magazines, which is a much slower process, there still is, at most national magazines, a pretty rigorous fact-checking process going on. What's interesting, though, is the rise of digital publishing, and this is something that we're struggling with here, but any magazine, any newspaper that is publishing now hundreds of stories a week or even a day, you can't fact check all of that. And and that's where stuff slips through.
And are you guys, so that's actually a question I often have about publications like Outside. You have your monthly magazine, which is a discrete amount of content, but then there's all this time between when the magazines come out and all this digital airspace, so to speak, to fill. Are you guys actually producing a continuous additional content to post on your website?
Oh, yeah. I'd say it's probably like nowadays. Okay, so when I first got here, we had a single online editor, and basically their job was to just transfer everything from the magazine onto the website. We now have, I think, between 15 and 20 on the digital staff, and they're cranking out anywhere from 30 to 50 articles a week.
And how do you guys treat that content differently from like what shows up in the magazine?
Well, it's so with the magazine, primarily we build an issue around our feature stories. That's always been our bread and butter. That's what readers respond to the most. So that's the core of it. But we are starting to publish features on the website as well.
You publish them after the issue comes out, obviously.
Yeah.
Do you do teasers for the feature stories?
Actually, right now we print right around the time, or we publish online right around the time that the story will come out in the print magazine. And sometimes if there's something with breaking news in it, we'll put it up before readers even get the printed issue.
Right.
But the in terms of the point of differentiation, we're just making mostly a decision of what we want in the print magazine has to be relevant when you get the print magazine. So there's a lot more breaking news, reaction stories to what's happening in the world online than there will be in print, because as we were talking about before, the news cycle is so quick.
Right.
But if something happens with, say, like public lands debate right now, or the shrinking of a national monument, we're not going to wait for print in 2 months to react to that.
So there's a real advantage to having
Absolutely.
the online platform.
Yeah.
What take me through the process of the origin, the beginnings of a story, through to it gets published in the magazine, not the digital side, but the print side.
Yeah.
What's that process?
It's a
What's the
feature
length?
story. So let's say we have. There are very few magazines that have on-staff writers. So we use a kind of a stable of freelance writers all over the world, really, but mostly in the U.S. We have a feature story meeting once a week. So all of those writers work with one editor here at the magazine. They send their ideas once a week to that editor. That editor brings the best ideas to this meeting, and then as a group, kind of all the senior editorial staff will go through all the pitches from that week.
And these freelancers, they're just all over the world doing their thing, looking for these stories.
Yep.
And they just send an email in once a week and say, "Hey, I got this idea."
I mean, not necessarily. They won't do that once a week. Just only when they have something good.
And they're also working with other publications.
Yep. Some of them will have on contract, or some of them with more of exclusivity. But yeah, a lot of them are working with multiple publications. So a lot of times before that pitch gets to the meeting, the editor and that writer will have a back and forth. So if I'm your editor and you send me an idea, I'll be like, "Hey, I think this has a lot of potential. I'd like you to look into X, Y, and Z," and then send it back to me. So I'll kind of shape it with you first, then I'll bring it to the meeting, and we'll talk about it as a group. And ultimately, it's my call what we assign, but I definitely, what I'm looking for in that meeting, and a lot of the editors have learned this, is enthusiasm about an idea. Because I'll often come in and be like, I'm not so keen on this. But a couple of
enthusiasm from who?
From the other editors in the room.
Oh, got
so we'll get to, let's say, guys, what do you guys think of Andy's story idea here? And if there's kind of a ho-hum that reflects, the kind of energy I'm bringing into the meeting with it, then I'm like, all right, let's move on.
Because it even might be a good story, but if nobody's that interested in it, it's hard to get it off the ground.
That is really telling for me.
Right. Yeah.
And at the same time, I might come in and say, like, I'm not really interested in the Andy story, but you two say, no, Chris, you're wrong about this, and this is a great idea, and we need to do this for this X, Y, and Z reasons, and somebody else chimes in. That will tell to me, like, I'm looking for a story to cause some kind of reaction.
Right.
Even if it's in opposition to what I think about it, that's
Sure,
a good
right.
sign. That's a good sign. So
But
that's
you
what
want
we're
your stuff
looking
to
for.
generate conversation.
Yeah, exactly. So, and there's a lot of stories that are good topics, but they don't generate a conversation. Exactly.
So that happens in the meeting.
Yeah.
That's every week.
That's every week. So, sometimes we won't assign anything out of that week. Sometimes we'll assign 4 stories that week. But then what the editor basically has the green light. Will decide on a kind of length and fee. He'll go back to the writer, or she'll go back to the writer and say, "Yep, we're on. Here's."
Is this Mary, the woman we had lunch with last week?
Mary
2
is
days
one
ago?
of those editors, yeah. But
Okay.
we probably have, let's say, 5 assigning editors
wow.
for feature stories.
Okay.
And they do multiple things at the magazine and online, but that's one of their duties. So they'll talk to the writer, and then the writer will set up their reporting, and sometimes it could be 6 months till we get a draft.
Because the writer may not have, like, if it's involving an adventure, doing something like climbing Everest, or like going to Machu Picchu or whatever it is, they haven't done it necessarily yet.
Right. Yeah. So it's a slow cooking process.
Yeah.
Sometimes we'll get a draft in a month because it's timely, but for the most part, like that kickstarts all this reporting that has to be done.
Do you set a deadline at that meeting and decide, okay, this is going to be for November of 2018, and you tell the writer whatever adventure you're going to do has to be done so that you can write it? Do you do that process
It's
then?
a real mix. Sometimes a story is like, this story will be ready when it's ready. And it doesn't really matter. It's evergreen. It's going to be interesting no matter when it comes out.
Like the End of the Wild story.
Like the End of the Wild story.
Right.
Other stories, we'll say like, hey, we've got to have this in for our March issue, so that means this deadline.
Right.
But for the most part, then, in any given month, we're dealing with an inventory that has like 10 stories that I could pluck out of.
That are done,
or I know are going to be ready for an issue. And then I look at, okay, well, how do these stories interact with each other? I want there to be this nice mix.
And this is how far in advance of the issue coming out. So we're talking about you're in a month. Let's say it's March, I guess, or whatever. What issue are you?
Well, I said March
about?
Actually because we're actually right now working on our March issue.
Got it. So we're in December,
which comes out in February.
But it gets read in
like
June.
a shell game. Right, exactly. It's the newsstands. Digital though comes out in January. Okay, so we're in.
He could not last here very long.
No, I'd be lost. I can't remember people's names, for God's sakes. I'd be lost. So December. We're in December. You're working on the March issue, which comes out beginning of February.
Yeah, like let's say first week of February.
First week of February. The articles that you're thinking about. Well, is there a theme of the issue already for March? Do you already know what that is?
Yes. And that's
did you pick
been
that
known
up
for a while?
Oh, it has.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not every issue has a theme, but sometimes we'll do a special issue theme. So this, for example, this one is a theme of work, and we're looking at kind of all the incredible ways that work and career has evolved in the last 10 years. So we have a piece about these services now that are basically cater to the gig economy, where people aren't fixed to an office or anything, and they want to travel the world, and they basically provide all the infrastructure so you can work and travel the world at the same time.
Wow.
We have a piece about sexual harassment in the guiding world, so how things have, in light of all the scandals that are going on, we wanted to look at how this is affecting our world, and that's something that we really try to do. Because it gets back to sort of how we make assignments. We really try to look at what's the national conversation right now. There's a lot that's going on in politics that you'd say, like, that is not an outside story. But we feel like it's our job to say, like, okay, what is everybody talking about, and how do we make this an outside story that's appropriate for our readership and relevant to our readership, and then is feeding back into this national conversation. So if it's, everybody's talking about head injuries in football, we're saying, like, okay, well, let's look at head injuries in some of the sports that we cover.
Right.
We find an incredible story there. Or it's, an example this year is there's been just what has transformed travel more than anything else. It's Airbnb. So we wanted to look at how Airbnb is kind of changing the economy of these mountain towns that we're always putting up on a pedestal.
Right.
And it's kind of fascinating. It's like it's become where people can't rent a place in these towns that were once dream towns to live in a mountain town. So that's the kind of thing we're looking for. But yeah, to get back to your question about the timing, like this big soup in my mind of like, I've got a pile of stories that are churning over here. I'm kind of getting updates on which ones are going to be ready, and then we start placing them in issues.
So have you, knowing your theme is work, let's just use this as it's something concrete for my mind to kind of fix around. So you've got these stories that have been in the works. You're not sure, they're kind of percolating around and floating around. Have you also made assignments specifically for that theme?
Yeah.
Like did you decide those like a couple months ago because of the?
When we'll come up with a full calendar for 12 months, and let's say like 3 or 4 of those will be a themed issue. So like last year we did. The meaning of life. We did a women's issue. We did a survival issue. So we know those are on the calendar. So for next year, one of the themed issues is this work issue. First thing we do is we look at that inventory of everything we've assigned and say, what retroactively of these stories that we've already assigned might actually work for this? And sexual harassment was one that did. And then we'll kind of have 2 or 3 spots that are filled up, and then we'll say, okay, let's now look for stories specifically on that theme.
Mm-hmm.
How much, as an editor, do you ever sometimes look and go, what would be who do I want to interact with? Like, what would be my fantasy? Who are the people in the outside world that I would actually really get a thrill of working with, and sort of shape some of the stories you do around getting to like meet your heroes?
Yeah, not so much that. I mean, my heroes are writers.
Okay,
so
fair enough.
It's who are the writers that I would want to work with, or who is the writer that I would want to read a story about this subject from. And that's why I say to the staff, so like we get all these ideas from writers. The thing is, I could get an incredible idea from you or you, Michael, and maybe I'm not so wild about your writing. Unfortunately, then I have to decide, like, do I want this story? Because you've sent the story idea. I can't then just take your idea and assign it to another writer.
Is that like an ethical thing? Or
yeah, it's an ethical thing.
It's an unwritten rule.
Exactly, yeah.
Because that guy I might be able to take it to another magazine, and they're like, yeah, write that for us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
they like my writing.
They like me.
Well, keep working on it, Michael. You might make it here someday. But that's why I say, like, to the staff all the time, like, the best ideas we can come up with are the ones that we come up with ourselves, and then we can assign to whoever we want. But that answers your question. Like, there are writers that won't write for out. They're not sitting there at home waiting for outside to give them, or pining away for an assignment for outside. But if we can entice them with the right idea, we'll get something incredible.
Cool.
And then, okay, so you've assigned some stories that you've come up with for that episode or for that issue, and you've got some stories you've identified as the long-term projects. When do you start then the process of making those stories ready for the issue? Like,
well, later than we should, if you ask our managing editor.
Of course.
But essentially, as soon as a story draft comes into an editor, they should be reacting to it and getting back to that writer. One of the hardest things for a writer out there. So, we know they're freelance, they're out on their own. They're pining and, just sweating over these drafts. And then they'll send them in, and the writer will be busy with something else, and they won't hear from them for 3 weeks. And so the poor freelance writer will be just like, oh, my God.
How bad was it?
They're tearing it apart.
They're just tearing their hair out.
Yep.
Editor will just get back to him. Hey, it was great. No problems.
Well, Becca edits my writing. Yeah. And I go through exactly the same thing. Like, God, I sent it last week. Is it, and I know what she's, I'm her kind of de facto boss. I know what she's doing, but I still, as a writer, I still have the same.
Every writer on the planet goes through that. Yeah.
And then she sends it back to me, and then I have the opposite thing. Then I procrastinate. I don't really want to read what she sent me, because it's usually I don't know how bad it is, but it's certainly full of like, yeah, this could be a lot better, and this could. And then I got, oh fuck, I thought it was done.
Yeah,
I thought this was like, Jesus, really?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's a whole other topic.
No, so I mean, I think. So ideally, you're reacting quickly to your writer. It goes back to them sometimes for multiple revisions, and then the editor will do kind of a final edit on the piece and say, I've taken this as far as I can go.
Do they know a word count at that point? Like how long?
Yeah, we shoot for a rough word count, but we try to let the stories dictate their length rather than the length dictate the story.
Yep.
And then that story will go to what's called a top editor here. It'll be kind of another set of eyes. They'll come to it fresh. Sometimes that'll kickstart a whole nother round of revising. Other times it's just a few tweaks in here and there, and then it'll go to a layout, and then we're starting production on it.
So what about photography? Like because some of your writers, I'm sure, are photojournalists.
Well, some of them like to think they are.
You want to name some names?
Andy Petranek.
No. I'm not a journalist or
I'm speaking up for our creative director here.
I use my iPhone for photos. What's wrong with that?
I know, Andy will be like, I got a bunch of photos to go with this as well.
Yeah, pretty much every writer thinks that their stuff, their photographs should be published alongside with their words.
Right.
But no, when assignment is made to a writer, that's when we're also giving all the information to our art department, and they're assigning a photographer. Either if it's on a trip, they'll accompany them, or maybe they'll come back behind them after the reporting is done and do a separate assignment. Does
a writer ever have a photographer that they like working with and say, hey, I'd like this guy to do it?
Very often that's in conflict with our creative director.
Right.
And you can imagine if it's sort of like if the creative director came to me and said like, hey, I've got this photographer and they want to work with this writer, and I'm going to be like, I'm sure they're great friends, but that's not who I want to work with.
Right.
And so, yeah, that comes up all the time, and we just say it's up to our creative director to decide who's going to shoot this.
Right. I have a question for you about some of the big stories, because I know that Into the Wild was sort of a seminal piece for you as far as your relationship with Outside Magazine. It was the first one that you saw when you got Outside Magazine. After you came on board as editor, do you have any pieces that you've been responsible for producing yourself that you are really, really proud of, that really stand out to you?
Yeah, the one that comes to mind immediately is a piece about the Yarnell Hill fire, where 19 wildfire fighters died in, I guess it was now 2012.
Arizona. It was in Arizona.
Arizona, right? Yeah. And we had a guy on staff. His name's Kyle Dickman, and he had been a hotshot. Not hotshot as in the actual fire term. He was a hotshot firefighter in a couple years after college, so a couple summers in California, and he'd been.
And those are the guys who get dropped into the middle of the fire?
Exactly, yeah. They're the kind of first line of defense. And so he knew this world really well, and so he had pitched about 8 months before the Yarnell Hill tragedy. He said, I want to write about hotshot firefighters, and I want to embed with my former unit, essentially. And we thought, okay, this is great. And he was a pretty young writer at that time, didn't have a lot of experience, but we thought we'd take a risk on it, and he was on staff. So he kind of dropped in 3 or 4 times, had just published this great story, writing about the lives of these guys. And about 2 weeks later, the Yarnell Hill tragedy happened. And he wanted to write about it. I had another really, really great writer who was interested in it as well. But we thought because of Kyle's experience and that would be a way into this world that people would talk to him. Mm-hmm. So he came back with just an incredible story, unbelievably tragic. He and I were on the phone multiple times crying through the process.
Wow.
And that story was nominated for a National Magazine Award, and just to this day just generates a lot of traffic on the website, because I think he just tapped into such the emotional core of what happened there.
And is that what really makes it special for you, that it was a very true story and it touched you deeply?
Yeah. And I think that what we did in that process is sort of like the ideal in terms of, until pretty recently, I think my parents thought that editing was essentially copy editing. I was looking for spelling mistakes and punctuation, And what they, when you're dealing with a 10,000 word draft, there are so many things that happen along the way in terms of restructuring the whole narrative and taking large pieces out, adding new pieces, deciding what goes where. It's just a huge jigsaw puzzle piece. Mm-hmm. And if you're working with great material and a great writer who's responding to you, it's this unbelievable process that is so rewarding. And that was what we had. We had this rapport where we were just in it together. He was doing this incredible writing, and I was able to help him shape it. And that's the ideal of what you want. A lot of times what you're doing, though, is the story's just not good. The writer's not reacting well to your edits, and you kind of have to take it over, and that's no fun.
Right.
Because they still get, it's by that writer.
It's by that person, you. And you're having to do kind of a lot of rewriting, and you're only going to get it to like you're going to take a C level thing to like a B or B plus maybe.
Right.
What you want is to get like that B plus and be able to get it to, okay, we can get this to an A and just really. How
long was the process in making that story?
Well, that was pretty quick because we wanted the story to, we knew a lot of people were going to be on the story, but that was about, I'd say 3 weeks. Yeah. Sometimes, though, that can be a 6-month process.
Wow. Do the stories that are tragedies tend to be the biggest, most iconic?
Yes.
Like I think about the two Krakauer pieces from the 90s, the Into Thin Air and Yarnell. And Into the Wild, and then the Yarnell Fire.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to have, dark humor around it, because sometimes we'll say in a story idea meeting, well, if somebody could have died, maybe this would have been a good story.
No.
Oh, God.
But it's true. That is what, I mean, there are the survival stories where, Aaron Ralston cutting off his arm.
Yeah.
There's just something... There's something about the genre of survival and the near misses, and also the tragedies themselves, that people respond to the most, without question.
And have you seen, any stories of, like, I don't know what to call them, but just like sort of unexpected success? I don't know. It's like I don't know how to characterize it, but like the underdog actually winning or something like that.
Like a story that I didn't think would do well?
No. I mean, actually, so there's the tragedy stories, there's the survival stories. I mean, both have like this kind of gut-wrenching sort of what's going to happen versus something extremely positive, maybe.
Yeah. It's true. The cynical idea about the media that like bad news sells is true. I mean, there are some feel-good stories that do well.
Well, Lance was a very popular.
That is
a cover.
That's a great example. At least in the early days, that was a great feel-good story.
Right, and then then his downfall was that bigger than the biggest of the triumphs?
Nothing touched. So we kind of have a few pillars at Outside. One of them is Everest. We can write about Everest for the next 20 years.
Right.
People are fascinated, and understandably so, because it just has all the human elements on stage.
And there's always
the biggest
a new
mountain
generation
in the world. There's always something new, some new controversy, something happening. Lance was the other one. I mean, we could have put him on the cover, and people were always like, "Why are you putting him on the cover again?" Well, why do you think we're putting him on the cover again?
Everybody wants to read about him.
Everybody wanted to read about him year after year, and I came on board right after he retired, so I kind of lost the Lance cash cow, essentially. But his story, I think, because it was at that time such a feel-good story, and he was in the news, and he was just an American doing well in a European sports, and it just had all the elements.
Right.
Why do you think it's the tragedies and the survival stories, the near misses, that really appeal to people? Like, I can sort of imagine for myself, I think, I picture myself in that situation, and I'm like, would I have been the survivor? Would I have been the hero? What do you suspect?
You just answered your own question.
You think that's it?
I mean, I think everybody, what are we all ultimately fascinated with, is our own mortality. And to read stories about people who, would I have been willing to cut off my own arm in that canyon?
Right.
Or do I want to climb Everest? If these are the costs, like what
do I have the guts?
Do I really have the? Is that really necessary? Is it?
Have you heard of the Marathon Monks by any chance? Do you know about these guys?
I don't think so. No.
Really?
So Andy watched this documentary like 5 o'clock this morning.
I couldn't
Marathon
sleep.
monks.
For some reason, I've been getting up very early. I was up at 4:30 this morning, and I read I subscribed to Kevin Rose's. He's just a guy. I subscribed to his newsletter, and he put a link to this YouTube documentary on the marathon monks of, I can't remember the name of the mountain that they climb, but it's a 7-year quest to become a living Buddha. Mm-hmm. And they believe that the quest to do that is done through the physical embodiment of Buddha and the kind of the breakdown and you have to toil through this thing. Well, the
and it's been going on for 1,200 years.
1,200 years.
Where is it? Is this in Japan?
It's in Japan.
Yeah.
It's in Japan.
Okay.
It's a quest. It's 1,000 marathons over the course of 7 years.
Okay.
And it's not just 26.2 miles. It starts there. So year one, you do 126 and it's not 26.2. It's probably like 40 kilometers or something. Mm-hmm. You do 100 of these in 100 days. You don't get to scatter them through the year. It's 100 marathons in 100 days. I think year two is 100 marathons in 100 days. Same trail, it's up and down stairs. They're really walking more than they are running.
Okay.
It's like 4 miles an hour ish. And by the time they get to like year four, they've upped I think year four they have to do 200 sequential days, 100 in one set and then 100 in another set. And then they get to like year five, and they keep upping the ante. Mm-hmm. It goes from like a 40K to like a 60K every day, 35 miles. And by year seven, in year six, not only do they have to have done the marathons, but they have to endure a 9-day, no sleep, no water, no food, fast, which for most people is not possible. You die, you literally die. And that's part of the quest, is you're up against death.
To get you as close to death as you can actually be, sort of like the Buddha and the asceticism that turned him to dust, almost. And
then the 7th year, it's 100 days, sequential days, and then a break, and then another 100 sequential days, and it's 52 miles each day. And and then
the 8-day,
and then there's an 8-day meditation after that is an 8-day sitting in front of this fire where you're dehydrating and you're moving towards being dust. Like literally, you're in this fire, and
wow,
it is. Think about this. They wear traditional garb. Mm-hmm. The robes he wears every day that he does this for 1,000 days is the same robes that you would wear if they were going to bury you. They're all white robes, and he's doing all these treks in these white robes. He wears these white sandals that have been around for hundreds of years. On a wet day, he'll go through like 6 pairs of these rice paper sandals.
Well, and they're also facing death in more ways than one. I mean, it's not just you could die. It's that
right. If they don't make it, if they quit, the expectation is that they will
commit ritual suicide.
Yeah, they'll hang. It's by hanging or by, what is it called?
Seppuku?
Disembowelment.
Yeah,
disembowelment.
Because they'll lose face by not
Disembowelment.
making it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was telling Michael,
it's death one way or another, either like symbolic death or actual death.
I was telling Michael, I haven't ever made it on my own 10 days just doing 10 minutes of meditation. Yeah. I can't imagine getting up even for the first year, the first 100 days. I go, okay, I'm waking up to do my 26.2 miles today. Up and down the mountains, climbing the stairs.
You guys should do a story.
I'm definitely look into it.
I could be your writer. I'm pitching you this idea.
Andy would also be your photographer.
We'll take a look at some clips.
Got no clips. What? I've been published on the Whole Life Challenge blog.
You got a book?
You got an editor and everything.
Right, exactly. Oh God, that's the last thing I need.
But yeah, I mean, there's a mountain involved, and endurance
for sure.
It's unbelievable. I'm shocked you don't know about it. It's I figured it was kind of.
Thanks for outing me on a public forum.
There's
nothing on top of my shit.
I just guarantee that you'll never share this podcast with anybody else.
It's about an hour-long YouTube documentary that you can watch on it.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I just think about.
But I think that's it. I mean, it's like that.
They put yourself in those shoes.
It's very different, and it's certainly not at all to that extreme level. But this rise of ultra endurance sports is exactly the same thing. I mean, and you did it with the eco challenges.
Yeah.
I'm sure you experienced that moment in that race. Like, what the fuck am I doing?
Yeah.
Why did I sign up for this?
Well,
and then the moment you cross the finish line, you're like, all right, where do I sign up for the next
Yes,
one?
yes.
I had that experience. In 1995, I did what was then called, I think, the California AIDS Ride. And it was a bike ride from San Francisco to Los Angeles. I wasn't a cyclist. I had a dirt bike that I rode around.
I don't think I ever even knew you did this.
I rode around L.A.
Wow.
for like commuting, and I was in a movie theater one day, and I was thumbing through like L.A. Weekly, which was something I did before. I was by myself before the movie started, and there was this application for the California AIDS Ride, and I was like, I bet I could do that. And so I signed up for it, and it was 6 months away. And I think, like, for some reason, like, I kind of put my bike in the closet and stopped using it. And then
was it a beach cruiser? Did you have a
No,
real
I
bike?
didn't. There was a guy who did it on a beach cruiser while I was doing it. But
Sounds like Mike Piccatelli.
I had just a Trek knobby tired mountain bike. I didn't know the difference at that time between any of the characteristics of bikes. I'm like, a bike's a bike. And about a month before it, I was like, oh my God, I have to. So I tried. I didn't even know what training was. And so, but it really was a question of could I do this? And I remember I went up and people would see my bike and they're like, "What are you doing here?" And that sort of to me became like a point of pride.
Did you have bike shorts? Did you have
I had a pair of bike shorts. Yeah, and I remember the first day.
Because I can imagine your taint just would have been.
Oh man! So like the first day was miserable. We were leaving San Francisco over these mountains, and I was like, "What am I doing?" By lunch, I wanted to quit. I was like, "I don't know what I've gotten myself into." The next morning, I woke up and I could barely walk, and I remembered I had met this guy.
It's what, 70 or 80 miles a day? Is it about right?
Yeah,
just varies,
more or less. Some days
fluctuates?
it's 90, one day it's 45.
Right.
And you just go to, you camp out and they carry your gear between things. And I'd met this guy, this photographer, I think in the airport in LA, who happened to be a friend of my dad's. And he had and he told me he had this, he had this hotel room because he was photojournaling. And I ran into him at lunch that first day, and I was like, "Please take me with you." I was like, "Just put me in the back of your van and just take me back to your hotel."
Sag wagon.
And he just looked at me and said, "You don't want me to do that?" He said, "I'm not going to do it." And so he didn't, and I made it. And I remember there were days where I ended up like being, I got acclimated to it. And I would pass guys on their road bikes, and I'd be like, "Yeah." And as soon as it was over, I was like, "Let's do another." But of course, by like 6 months later, I was like, "I am never touching that again." Yeah. The 10-foot pole.
I just remembered, I hadn't thought of this in years, but one of my first long distance in quotes, was the 50-mile ride from Ensenada to Rosarito. Yeah. It was a big, huge event every year, every spring, that you'd go down to Mexico and you'd do this 50. I'd never ridden 50 miles. I had a rock hopper, I think was my first mountain bike, and very similar experience. Like, I didn't really train, didn't know what it meant to train on a bike. I was a Marine, so I figured I was tough enough. And I did the same thing with I did a 50-mile ultra marathon of the San Juan Hills. And, one of our teammates in the Eco Challenge was a ultra endurance athlete, and she's like, "Let's do this as a team. It'd be a good warm-up for the Eco Challenge." I'm like, "Okay." And longest run I think I'd ever done is about a 10K up until that point. Wow. And, made it really well for like 25 miles. And
Is this the one you ended up?
I didn't make it.
Right.
I was in
48 miles?
Sag wagon at 48 miles and
2 miles before the end.
I couldn't. It was just dumb. I mean, I probably could have made it.
You could, but it's not how you want to finish.
Right, and they were pulling me off the course, and I was injured, and I was
crawling.
Yeah, I would have made it, but had death been at my doorstep, hanging or make it, I would have made it.
Of course.
It sounds like you kind of wussed out.
I know.
Well,
so this is funny.
Let's talk about the wuss out of the,
when I was 49, I was like, what do I want to do for my 50th? And I thought, well, the only thing I've ever really quit has been that 50-miler. I'll sign up for another 50. I'll do a 50-miler. And there was the North Face has a series of 50 ultras. And there was one up in the Presidio in San Francisco.
I've done that one.
Oh, really?
Yep. Got a bunch of friends to sign up.
Got a bunch of people at the gym. They got very excited. I went into 6 a.m. class. I still teach at CrossFit LA, and I was like, guys, it's a great goal. I'm 49 and I got a year to train because I turned 50 in December, and this was December of when I was 49. So I had a full year. I got time to do this time. And so there were 4 people who were ultra endurance people. They had done the Catalina 50 and some of these other races. And so they were like, yeah, this is awesome. We're in. And so nothing more was really said. Tim Martin had sent me his registration for the race. I did it. Have you signed up yet?
And did Doss did it? Nikki did it?
Yeah, they all signed up. And as I kept considering what it meant to go do this. I live in Santa Monica. I've got at that point an 8-year-old son. I coach soccer. I coach baseball. I kept thinking, okay, if I want to do this well, I need to run. And I need to run regularly, and I need to run a lot. I need to put hours on the trail. And the question kept coming back for me, do I want to spend, I don't know how many hours, I didn't add it all up, but do I want to spend that amount of time away from my family, missing that time?
Yeah.
And the answer kept coming back every time I asked myself was no, I don't want to do that. Not that I wanted to not run 50 miles, because there's part of me that I still would like to go out and run 50 miles. And maybe when, my son is off to college and, my time is more of my own, maybe I'll do that again.
Do 60 for your 60th?
Maybe. That's interesting. That's an interesting idea. I'll have to tack 10 on to the end of the North Face.
That's right. Just run back.
But yeah, so
yeah. Well, ultra is not a sport for parents.
No.
Well, I was listening to a podcast. I can't remember the name of the guy, but he's a bow hunter. He's also an endurance racer, and he was talking about doing the Leadville 100. And then and in the podcast, he was talking about this upcoming race he was doing that was like 250 miles or something like that. And like every part of me knows better. Like every part of me is like, no way. And then there's this little whispering voice was like, yeah, but do you think maybe? Yeah. Like it'd be really cool if you did it, don't you think? There's that part that like yearns to go beyond like any concept you have of what you could possibly do. And I guess we all have to find. But
there's some that are so far beyond that they just seem ludicrous. Yeah. Kind of like yesterday when you were negotiating, kind of for that pot. That when we were with the Indian with the guy in downtown.
Not pot.
No, not pot. Not
pottery.
Pottery. Not marijuana.
Yeah.
Piece of pottery. We were at the plaza.
Yeah.
And Michael had seen a
piece of pottery, and I went over and I was talking to the guy about it, and he was telling me the story. This was his wife's pottery. This was his pottery. He told me about learning from his grandmother, and he wood fire. He gave me the whole story, and I was like, I'm really interested, And I had some idea, because some prices were labeled. Like he had these small magnets that were like $8. I was like, oh, maybe I could get one of these for $30 or $40. Mm-hmm. And so he's telling me the whole story. I'm like, great, can you give me some of the prices here for this? And he's like, well, this pot is $300, and this one. And I was like, what? I was like, we're so far from a price I'd be willing to pay. I can't even negotiate with you. Like, I'd be like, can I give you 60?
Yeah.
It just would. It wouldn't work.
Yeah.
But it's so far, like the Tour de France is so far beyond anything that I would ever picture. I can't really relate to that. Mm-hmm. I can relate to a 100-mile bike ride. Mm-hmm. I can relate to maybe even a 200-mile bike ride. But that is, anyway. So just interesting.
But I think you have to find. We all want to find a way to do it. Like for me, it's definitely not running. But we have an old friend, and Andy did a podcast with him, and he did some pretty interesting stuff.
Who's this?
Traver.
Oh yeah.
And he did a 28-day silent in the dark meditation retreat. So I mean, pitch black, never acclimate to the dark. It's just you can't see your hand in front of your face for 28 days. You have a mat to sleep on, a meditation cushion. They bring you food. And then he also did this course in Utah. Is it called Boss? I think they do these outdoor field courses, and he did one of those for 28 days. And there's a good portion of that where you're soloing on your own, and and you're finding your own food. And if you don't find food, you're not eating. And so, and those to me, like I'm like those are more inside of like my conception of who I am.
Yeah.
And where I'd like to be able to maybe stretch myself.
That was why Eco Challenge was doable for me. I wasn't an adventurer like. I wanted to leave the world behind and have no security or safety and go conquer the North Pole. I was like, I got a radio. If shit really hits the fan, which it has, and sometimes the radio doesn't work, I found out. But I always felt like there was a level of safety that I was willing to undertake. Yeah. A level of risk that I was willing to undertake, and that's I was an adventure racing Yahoo.
But yeah, I think maybe like that kind of taps into why people like these stories. It's like what are the limits?
These stories, but also why they like. I mean, this is kind of the phenomenon in the world we cover right now, and CrossFit's a part of it too. It's like just this desire to push ourselves into that pain cave.
Yeah,
and for a lot of people, they question that. Like, why would you want?
Well,
to
you do
that?
It yourself, right? What are some of the events you do?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not in any stretch of the imagination close to an elite level of it, but I have always found something totally addictive about that process, whether it's an ultramarathon, which I've done. Really love doing ski mountaineering races, which is kind of these long slogs up and over mountains on skis. But there's something about...
Long meaning a couple hundred miles?
Well, the last one I did was the Power of 4 in Aspen, and it's... there's 4 major ski areas in Aspen, and you go up and over them all. I think it's about 30 miles total, but 13,000 feet of climbing, something like that.
On your skis.
All on your skis. And
how long does that take?
that took us, God, I want to say 8 hours, something like that. 8 or 9 hours.
You have a pack, you got water.
Yeah, you have
to be
do it with a partner, which is why I say we.
Okay. You got to be self-sustaining?
Yeah, there's a couple of aid stations, but for the most part, you are. Nowadays, it's a huge sport in Europe. It's just kind of
ski mountaineering,
like
called endurance
ski-mo.
race.
Yeah,
ski-mo.
Endurance mountaineering, and you're wearing Lycra suits, which is a little hard to get used to.
It's kind of like when you first weightlift and you wear a singlet.
First time we came to a race, the sponsor who gave us a media pass to come try it, gave us these La Sportiva yellow and black Lycra, and I said to my partner, I was like, I don't know, and he's like, no, trust me, everybody's going to be wearing this. I'm like,
come on, you get to feel like Spider-Man.
Yeah, well, no, I got there and everybody's in full-on Lycra. So, but anyway, there's something about like that moment in the race where you're like, I just don't feel like I'm going to finish this. I'm suffering, and then you cross the finish line and you literally want to sign up for the next one. You have no idea why. And I think women have it with childbirth, They put themselves through
you're in trouble.
Ultimate test.
He's about to have a kid in June.
Yeah, when's this podcast coming out?
Oh, God, you haven't announced that yet,
No, I haven't.
You will have by then.
Yeah, because it'll be in a couple. We're going to announce in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so, I say, and I like walking on eggshells, I'm not equating this with childbirth, but this is like the closest I can get to that, to appreciating that feeling. Like the baby's in your arms and you've already forgotten everything that you've just gone through.
Right. And I think that maybe that's exactly sort of what you're talking about, because what you almost go through, it's almost like this, when you finally, it's like coming out the other side.
Yeah.
It's you go through that rebirth.
Yeah.
It's like you burned in the flames and you were reborn. And I'm sure there's some sort of physiological chemical rush to it that you're like, oh, yeah. I would do this again.
Well, and there's also cliche to it, but I know that it applies directly to my life. Like I can come back to work after that. I've got that kind of surge of energy and rush, but it's also this feeling like I just went through that and this terrible thing's happened at work and no big deal. We'll get through this. Like you just learn so much more about what you can tolerate.
I think that's a big thing. Like I don't want to go out and get my arm pinned under a rock and sit out there for a week wondering if I'm going to live or die. However, it's like it would be great to have the knowledge that I could do that. That I survived that.
Yeah.
It's like they did a really great job portraying it in the film when he was actually severing his arm and going through cutting the nerves, and it's like, oh my God! You look at it, you go, at that point I would probably just die.
Yeah.
So there's this envy for the people who have survived something like that, and you're like, God, I wish I had that about myself, and so I used to fantasize about those things when you encounter them.
One of my favorite all-time assignments was about this long, the 2 inches of copy, and it was for our 30th anniversary issue, and we had Aaron Ralston, the guy who cut off his arm.
Yeah.
So we used to give away these pocket knives, these cheap Chinese pocket knives, if you got a subscription to Outside. So we had him review the quality of our pocket knife.
You had Aaron review it?
Yeah, the guy who cut off his own arm. So he took it.
It's probably better than what he ended up with.
Yeah, I think so.
Because by the time he was finished with that knife, he'd been chipping away at rock for a week.
Yeah,
and
right.
It was just,
that knife was not in good shape.
It was like the back of a butter knife.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Good God. And then breaking your own arm to get through the bone.
Do you find any of that that similar kind of breakthrough in issues? That does the magazine world relate at all to what we're kind of talking about? Like you go through hell and you're in the middle of getting this issue done, and then you get the issue done, and you're like, yes.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, some issues, I would say more on like a story level.
Okay.
Where it's like I said before. I said like a puzzle, but it's like a Rubik's cube sometimes, and you're just constantly fiddling around with the structure of a story, and then you unlock it and you figure it out.
Is there a feeling that you have when you know you've solved it?
Yeah, It's not an immediate, because by then you've stared at it so long.
Right.
It's like it's actually when you put it out into the world finally, and you think you're like, I think we really got it with this story. And then when you see how it resonates and the kind of the reception and the letters you get and that kind of thing.
I was actually going to ask you about that, because I oftentimes, when I read a magazine and I'll see in the next issue people will have written in letters about one of the articles, and God, it's never occurred to me to write a letter to respond to a magazine. Do you guys must get a lot of responses to the stuff that you publish?
We do. We get a lot of it. Probably 75, maybe 80% of it is negative.
Oh, really?
Which makes sense. Like what you say, like. Most people don't think like, I read this and I'm going to write to the letter a letter. Like, usually that's triggered by like, God, I hated that.
Like
I need to tell somebody I hated
Yelp
that.
reviews.
But you're not going to read something, God, I love that, and I'm going to share my love for
Right.
that with the editors of the magazine.
And what typically do people respond to negatively? Is like, I could have done better. You guys are wrong.
Is it the writing? Is it the subject matter? Is
it
it
could be everything. But there's some things that I know. Every time we write about Lance, I can guarantee you we're going to get 1,000 letters. Like, why are you paying attention to this guy anymore?
Right.
Like, we hate this guy. He's a cheater.
Right.
There was a time when we would question whether he was a cheater when he was still lionized, and we'd get the opposite letters like, how dare you? He's an American hero. He's saving people from cancer.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, anything that touches on political, which is almost anything these days, is going to elicit reaction. But as I said earlier on, like, actually, I think you said it, like, we want our stories to provoke a reaction. So a lot of times that's a negative reaction, and we'll get a letter about it. It's hard to categorize exactly. I can usually predict
what kind of negative reaction.
What kind of stories, we'll get.
And so, okay, I just want to shift gears a little bit.
Yeah.
So, your personal life, how do you manage you have 2 kids, you've got another one on the way.
Mm-hmm.
What's your work-life balance? Are you working 100-hour weeks? Are you working 30-hour weeks? Are you walking the talk that what I might picture you pitching as a balanced life in Outside Magazine? How does it work for you?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty I think it would fit the picture pretty well. I mean, one of the huge advantages is that I'm in Santa Fe. My house is 5 minutes from the office. I always joke, like, sometimes you flick open your phone and it'll say your commute time, and one time it said it's approximately 4 minutes to 400 Market Street. So, but essentially, I've eliminated what is a huge part of most people's day, which is it could be a half hour, it could be an hour commute, it could be on the subway. So I have that time. So my mornings, I can get into the office at 8 o'clock after I drop the kids off at school, and I've already had an hour-long run, and then I can put work time in. So just where I live really enables me to have a lot of balance. And also just with anything that you've done for a long time, I don't think I was ever working 100-hour weeks, but certainly when I first became the editor, it was way up over my ski tips and kind of trying to figure out what I was doing and trying to make sure that I was tricking everybody here to believe that I knew what I was doing.
Right.
And then, you just do something for a while and everything becomes easier and you can do something in a lot less time. So I would say I work, a 40-hour week and that's very manageable. I also work with incredible people. But everybody here, I think, that comes here, if there's any reluctance about living in Santa Fe because they've come from New York, it's that quality of work-life balance that this place enables you. The fact that, like, on a powder day, we're all skiing before work, and then can put in a full day's work and fit all that in is just an unbelievable opportunity.
Tell me a story, if you can generate one, about a time as editor of Outside Magazine that you've really struggled, that has been a real, like, a hurdle or something you may have felt it was insurmountable, or has there been one? And
yeah, it's hard to say. This magazine has always had the good fortune of, like, that we have in our industry what are essentially our Emmys or our Oscars, called the National Magazine Awards, now called the Ellys, and this magazine has always had a reputation of winning a lot of those. And in the 90s, that time of when Into Thin Air came out, the magazine was the only magazine in history to win 3 national magazines for general excellence, which is like the best picture Oscar, for 3 years in a row. So that's always sort of been the standard of the magazine. And for the first, I think, 4 or 5 years I was here, we didn't get any nominations. And every year that would be sort of like the worst day of my year. Like, get the news that we didn't get any nominations, have to share that with the staff, feel like the past 12 months of work that you thought was really solid was great. And then trying to figure out, like, am I fooling myself? Are we all fooling ourselves? We thought we did excellent work last year. So I think the first time we broke through and we won the National Magazine Award for General Excellence was this like lesson of, I didn't feel actually like the work was any markedly different than it had been previous year. And to remember that, like, yeah, I'm really excited that we won, but I want to also believe that what we were doing before and what we'll do after, regardless of what the reception is, it's figuring out when you can really believe that the work you've done is worthy of it versus.
So you can't look back at those years where you weren't nominated and say, I see.
Maybe
where
the first
we
couple
fell
years
short.
I was here, I could see that there was some improvement going on. But in terms of like on a story level or feature level, no, it's harder for me to see that. But I think somebody in the industry, I think it was David Granger, is the old editor of Esquire magazine. He said to me, National Magazine Awards, they mean everything when you get one and nothing when you don't. And that was like the best advice that I could get. So just to remember, like,
kind of let you breathe a little bit, like,
yeah.
Oh, okay.
So when I got one, it was like, okay, I feel like now we're on top of the world. But to remember that if you don't, it doesn't really have to mean anything.
Yeah, and that everybody else in the industry besides the one who won also didn't.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, that was, I remember the real struggle is like needing that. Okay, I'd gotten as far as I could as an editor. I felt comfortable in the role because I was pretty young when I first took this role, and I'd been an intern here before. So that, like,
Did you go from intern to editor?
No, I'd gone to a couple other magazines before that.
Oh, okay. So you didn't work your way up through the ranks and outside.
And probably never could have because of that. Because it's hard to jump from that when the perception is always, oh, he was an editor here. I kind of had to make my reputation elsewhere.
Gotcha.
Yep.
But to feel like I needed that, like, validation from the peers in your industry who are judging those awards to say, okay, yeah, you are doing a good job. And then once you get that was sort of my feeling of breakthrough, a feeling of comfort in the role, I guess.
Right. What so as a writer, I'm sure you've read Stephen Pressfield's stuff, The War of Art. Do you know?
A little bit, yeah.
You know, he has this thing about resistance. And, you know, the most important thing as a writer is you just start to write, just sit down to write. Do you have that kind of a rigor around, I know it's work for you, how does that show up for you, given that you do it for a living? Yeah,
I think for me the rigor is, 10 years in, it's essentially the same job in a lot of ways as when I first started here. So how do I make it still interesting and challenging in the same ways that it was when it was like every time I came in the door, I was like, okay, what's going to face me today?
Right.
And the savior for me has been the fact that the media industry has completely been disrupted in those 10 years and is constantly evolving. Like, I'm hosting a podcast now. That wasn't something that existed 10 years ago.
Right.
We're publishing 100 stories a week on the website. That didn't exist before. So that evolution, the times that I find the job the most challenging is like when there feels like there's this stasis, like there isn't something changing or evolving. And it's trying to tap into what that is. And as soon as that new thing reveals itself, I kind of find myself really re-engage in a way that I hadn't been able to before.
How much writing do you assign yourself stories? Yeah,
I don't do a lot of it, and that probably has to do with the work-life balance.
Right.
I would love to go and report more stories. The reality is it's hard. I've got 2 young kids and another on the way. So I will occasionally write pieces. The creative outlet for me has been this podcast. to be able to talk to a lot of the people that I've always wanted to talk to in the world. We do a lot of editing on those and some narration, which is kind of scratches the same itch.
And you've got more than one podcast.
Yeah, we've got multiple podcasts in the feed, and it's this whole new business model that we're trying to figure out. And that's
who's been the most fun, intriguing, or like wide-eyed, nervous guests you've had that you've gotten to speak? Do you get nervous for guests?
I used to. I yeah, a little bit, but if I can do them in person, I don't get nervous. I get nervous on the phone. If that seems strange, but
no,
it's like,
I think
do you do Skype?
Because
do you do Skype or do you do?
I don't do Skype. It's because you can't get that body language, that rapport. But as soon as I'm in person, but probably my favorite is I really like talking to Michael Gervais. He's a sports psychologist. He works with
Not Ricky Gervais.
No. He works with like everyone from the Seattle Seahawks to all the Red Bull athletes, and he just deals with the mental side of performance, and it's kind of this long overlooked piece.
What mental? They just 3, 2, 1, go.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, come on, they just hucked himself off a cliff. What? What's the big deal?
Well, it's true. I mean, I think almost any sport you get into or profession, like we focus so much on our diet and what we're eating and the way we're exercising and preparing, but think the least until very recently about how it's the other piece that you can train.
Yeah, right.
And
I think that starting to sort of cross the boundary in everything.
Yeah.
You know, with what we do, you know, in the Whole Life Challenge, it's like there's your nutrition, there's your exercise, there's your sleep, these actual physical characteristics of your life and your practices, and then there's this other part that we have as part of the challenge, which is training that inner experience. It's kind of like it's a meta sort of experience of those things. It's like, what is your mindset like? What is your mind like while you're eating?
Yes.
And your relationship to that, and your relationship to exercise, because when you shift those things, I mean, it's really incredible how the quality of those things changes, how the intensity can change, how the acceptance of the way things are can change. It's pretty extraordinary.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think so it's cool to see those things being adopted now, and especially like, you know, what you would think would be these highly just macho sport of NFL football, these players that he worked with, and they're working on their gratitude journals, you know.
Wow.
Which is great.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sounds like somebody I'd like to talk to.
Yeah, you should.
Yeah. No, it sounds like a great person for
I'll just have you introduce me to all the guests you have.
That's how the podcast world works.
Exactly right. Totally. Chris, thank you so much. This has been a really great conversation, and
Thanks so
I
much
really
for
appreciate
having me on.
Appreciate your time.
Really
this
enjoyed
is
talking to you guys.
I've learned a ton. I've never really had. Thanks for being here. We could do this more often. It's kind of fun to have a third.
You guys should hang out more.
Maybe we should. We actually kind of enjoy it. Go figure. Yeah, look forward to the next time. We'll have to do it again sometime.
For sure. All right.
The Whole Life Podcast is produced by our podcast team: Winslow Jenkins, Becca Borowski, and Ernie Hurtado. You can find all of our episodes, links, and complete show notes at wholelifechallenge.com/podcast. The way that I've found is the best way to listen to podcasts is to subscribe so that episodes automatically get delivered right to your mobile device. You can do that in any podcast app on your phone. And hey, if you like the podcast, please do me a favor. Go to iTunes and give it a 5-star rating. And recommend it to your friends. I'm Andy Petranek, and thanks so much for listening.